The information and opinions expressed in this video are of a general nature and are not intended to be investment advice, research, or recommendations. Please consult your investment professional for your own circumstances. The information in this video reflects the opinions of Arca Labs and the video's participants on the date of production and are subject to change at any time without notice due to various factors. Arca Labs is separate and unaffiliated from any third parties participating in the video presentation, and Arca Labs is not responsible for any third parties' products, services, or policies.
Welcome to Tokenization Talks, powered by Arca Labs. I'm Annelise Osborne with Arca Labs. We are focused on innovating responsibly, and we are excited to bring you institutional thought leaders in the digital asset space. So our guest today is Gabby Kusz, who is the CEO of the Global Digital Asset Currency Association. So it's the global DCA is a global self-regulatory association for the digital asset and cryptocurrency industry. So Gabriella, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm super excited to have this conversation. And I'll preface it a little bit by saying kind of one of the big challenges with institutions today in the digital asset space is regulation. And so it'd be great I'm really excited for you to talk about kind of what you're doing from a regulatory perspective and how we can help push adoption for digital assets. So thank you for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. This is really exciting. I've seen a number of your talks and I'm a big fan, so happy to finally be a guest. So thank you very much for the invitation.
Great, thanks. So I would love to how did you get involved in digital assets to begin with?
Sure. So I often tell people it's because of a Subway sandwich, which it actually really is. I often say that I should have Subway sponsor some of the discussions that I have, but I had gone to a Voice of Blockchain conference in 2019, and it was at a time that I was, really looking to transition career-wise. I had worked for the majority of my career in economic and financial sector development and reform, and for the World Bank, for the International Federation of Accountants. So I had done lots of work in what we call like VUCA environments, or volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And happened to go to a Voice of Blockchain conference when people were talking about some of the challenges that they had. To me, it had a lot of the markers for transformation. So not just a new asset class, not just a new way of kind of thinking or using technology, but really, a space where the legal and regulatory framework isn't going to fit anymore. And the workforce development and university curriculum will need to be modified to be adjusted to, help usher in that transformation. And you're going to need to have regulators that will have enhanced capacity and perhaps roles in order to facilitate responsible development in the space. And when you have all of these different, elements or verticals within an economy that start to get touched, because again, a lot of what we were talking about wasn't even just financial sector. It was now transport. It was real estate. And so when you start to see the breadth and expansiveness of digital assets and what they will disrupt and do, it's, probably best practice to take a look and say, well, what is the tool that development economists or economic development experts would use in that space? And it's a self-regulatory mechanism, because we know that technology or the pace of transformation is going to outpace government and regulators. And so in order to protect consumers and to do this responsibly, it's incumbent upon the industry to kind of step forward. And so that's sort of how I got into the space, was that realization, and then working with a group of stakeholders to really bring that to life.
So the self-regulation is kind of a step because of the fast pace of technology, as you had said, right, to help regulators work with creating an efficient regulated environment. Is that fair?
Yeah, so it's really, sometimes people get caught up in the SRO and some of the terminology, but effectively what it is a public-private partnership between government and industry, recognizing that neither of those, perhaps on their own, is able to effectively police and have discipline and support constructive development of the industry. But if they came together, then you would be able to leverage some of that expertise and sophistication that the industry has. You would be able to, leverage the, faster pace and ability to be flexible with regards to regulatory approaches. And then you'd be able to be backstopped by a formal regulator who has the legal authority to kind of engage in that space. And so that's kind of really at its core. It's, in government, you call it like a P3. It's a public-private partnership.
So what do you see as are the big regulatory challenges right now for digital assets?
Sure. So I think you could look at some of the bills that are coming forward and you can see sort of where the gaps are based on where that they're focusing. But I think, we did a lot of work this summer as part of our self-regulatory discussions. We did a huge 6-month project, which will be published in August in the Journal of Financial Compliance. Just got the date on that. That looked at what self-regulation for the industry could look like, how it would be structured, and how you would position that. And when you do look at that, you start to see kind of 4 core areas that everybody flags as common challenges. Those are taxonomy, it's stablecoins and payment tokens, it's custody, and then there's this last part that everyone's like, it's just going so fast, and we know it's going to continue to change, and we're going to have to do all this all over again. That's why we look at self-regulation as a really supportive and constructive mechanism, especially when we talk about sort of the next wave of what's going to happen in terms of maturation, which will be along the lines of decentralized finance.
So how, I guess, kind of breaking each one down, how can we work with legislatures and regulators to, I guess, give them confidence that what we are creating can and will be compliant, and we can come up with regulation and laws that make sense?
Mm-hmm. So I think one of the first pieces of that is, starting at a very early stage, like we are at the global DCA, to start to have some level of discipline around what quality is and which firms are abiding by it. So for us, what makes us a little bit different is that we actually very actively vet our member firms. So as they come in, we take a look at their governance structure, their UBOs, their source of funds. We're trying to understand, what their business model is. We need to have them AML KYC, their leadership, and then also to go through and have them, attest to alignment with our aspects that we require for AML KYC systems. Everybody signs on to a code of conduct that has ethical and standards of practice that are embodied. And then from there, we do ongoing sort of wellness checks with our members. So we'll be creating, most likely, given some of the activity in the market this summer, will be our first round of wellness checks on our members. I think that's a big piece of it. And then the second piece is just, coming to the table with standards and guidance that can be accepted and embraced by and respected by regulators and legislators. So, this past fall, we put forward our core principles. These are 6 principles that addressed a lot of what we saw as some of the pain points of failure and some of the collapses that had occurred around that time with regards to centralized digital asset enterprises. So these are things that maybe, especially the institutional viewers and listeners, will be extremely familiar with. But I think when you have an emerging industry, you have a lot of young builders and founders, some of what may seem like common sense is actually not that common. And so these were things like good governance structures, enterprise risk management, liquidity, reserves, appropriate custody, safeguarding customer assets, supporting good bookkeeping and record keeping, and then independent audit. And so, even with the responses that we did most recently, so if you're asking about legislative and regulatory, to the SEC's recent, RIA digital asset custody response, instead of just saying, we disagree with this, it was, we disagree with the approach that you're taking, but we do agree that more needs to be done with regards to safeguarding assets. Here is core principle number 2 that addresses that. So it's stepping into that space of, instead of just kind of complaining or saying that things aren't good and they shouldn't be this way, it's taking that time and energy and also trying to devise a solution that we know would be acceptable to your counterpart. And so that's where that collaborative, engaging, participatory perspective that comes from a focus on self-regulation, economic growth, and development comes from.
And then do you get responses or questions back so that there's an open interaction?
Mm-hmm. So for this response in particular, this one has been flagged as one that we'll likely get back and forth on. More broadly, we have an active advocacy effort in Washington, D.C. So we work through a group that manages many alliances in traditional as well as kind of emerging fields, Atlas Crossing. So we actually have positioned very heavily as a mature or professional voice for the industry. And that has been a lot of, instead of a push campaign, it's more of a pull campaign, which means that I sit back and I provide you with data, information, perspective, and then we get drawn into conversations as opposed to this is what we want. These are our, no-goes. It's more like, what is it that you and your office or your committee are trying to achieve? How can we work together to make sure that there's the best outcomes for both industry, but also for the broader society and economy as a whole?
So I recognize that you're a global organization, so you're working outside of the U.S. as well. One of the concerns right now with different companies that I have spoken to and continue to hear about are people looking to leave the United States because the concerns of clarity on regulation it could be a problem with doing business. And so, are you hearing that? Are you seeing that? How can we prevent that and keep business in the United States and keep the United States innovating?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very real concern. And I think, one of the things that I think sometimes legislators and regulators don't understand is that, in previous decades when people would say, oh, well, we're going to go offshore, you could hear that and then maybe have another couple of years to get things in order. I think just as we've seen with some of the recent runs on the banks, like technology, interconnectedness, globalization, you don't have these years to hear that, statement and then to react. And so what we're seeing is a lot of active movement to offshore or to, have a plan B. And I think that, it's not to jurisdictions that are less desirable from a legal and regulatory strength perspective. It's to jurisdictions that enable and are looking to support constructive growth and development of the industry. So I think, those are very serious issues that need to be managed for sure. I think if I'm looking at, what the US can do, I think I've worked in a lot of countries. Okay, so 50 different countries. I've focused in some countries that were global centers of excellence in a given space. And I've also worked in challenger countries or countries that were trying to keep up and countries that were perhaps falling behind and needed to pick up the pace. One of the things that I think is extremely important for a country that is, maybe falling significantly behind in a key area that has impacts for both national security, economic growth, geopolitical positioning, and then social outcomes. If you are falling behind in something that hits those 4 areas, like we are with blockchain and digital assets, then the best thing you can do today is to take a look at what some of those leading jurisdictions are doing. How have they addressed digital asset legal and regulatory? How have they facilitated institutional engagement in a safe and supportive manner? And so, one of the things that we're doing is we have our big conference that's coming up, the Digital Asset Connection Conference, in about, a month now. Yikes. But we're bringing a lot of foreign regulators in and global perspectives. So a number of our speakers are former IMF or former World Bank that aren't just looking at it from a standpoint of here's my company, here's what I'm doing. It's here's my company, here's our technology, here's how that works within our industry and our country. But here's what we need to draw in terms of building, growing better in order to be globally competitive. And so I think sometimes, we get caught up in a lot of conferences that are all about biz dev and networking, and that's great. But if the strategic orientation of your business is off, who cares how many conferences you've sponsored or how you need to have strategic thinking at the table that's really going to position you to lead. And if you don't have that, you're going to get left behind, whether you offshore or not.
So I do hope we have more regulators and legislators that would listen to us, like the podcast, or have more conversations with us or ask questions. What about from a company perspective? What can we do as institutions or companies that are working in digital assets to help kind of solve these problems from our perspective?
Mm-hmm. So I think, again, like a lot of what we're doing, so there's, digitally native, or I would say direct digital asset firms. Okay. And then there's a lot of peripheral firms. And I think what I mean by peripheral are, again, when we talk about industry development, you could be the greatest that you are in terms of technology. But if you haven't brought in these important industries that are necessary in order to kind of create a runway upon which your industry can take off, you're never going to go anywhere. So what are those industries? It's banking, it's insurance, it's accounting and auditing, it's legal, and it's consulting. And these are what I call, especially for emerging technologies, these are sort of the ground foundational industries that have to be supportive, enabling. They themselves may have to adjust. And so instead of seeing these as contrarian or in opposition, or seeing winners and losers in some of this, it's about how all, boats will rise together and how you can work collaboratively. Sometimes I think you hear people talk about things like, oh, well, these are the dinosaurs, or we're going to eliminate the need for fill in the blank type vertical in the financial sector. And, that's very interesting. And I think there are, potential truths to that. But transformation usually takes 30 to 50 years, number one. And number two, any traditional financial sector firm should never and hasn't ever in the past just stood still. So they themselves will have to transform and transition. Okay. And so, all of this all at once, all together, almost like an Amish barn raise, has to come up in order for an industry, honestly, for an industry to like really succeed. And I think that there's lots of people who focus on their firm and who focus on their product, but nobody really to date has been focusing on how you're going to drive the growth of an industry. And that's a different viewpoint and vantage point. And I think when you do that, then you see how all these people are all interrelated and how you have to work together. Because at the end of the day, even from a legal and regulatory or a legislative advocacy, lobbying perspective, those people have the deeper relationships. They have the trust already built in. They can understand and they can help support through insurance products that help mitigate risk, through legal advice that helps to put the industry on a positive trajectory, through consulting services, through banking support that's uniquely tailored perhaps to manage some of the risks that you're going to see. All of that has to develop so that this industry stays on track. And so that's why I say, it's important for the direct digitally native firms to be engaged. But as somebody who's done lots of work on industry development, that's the piece that you need to start to activate so that you have sort of broad built-in. When we talk about mainstreaming, what does that mean? It means nothing more than making sure that everybody wins, participates, adjusts, and moves forward successfully. So that's kind of like what I would say is, if you're a firm in this space, really buying into that concept of industry development, being strategic, and also making sure that your policy positions embrace that broader perspective on where this technology is going, and trying to keep as many winners at the end of the day as possible.
So in summary, I hear that we really need to work together and we need to strategize and educate too, is what I hear you saying. So I know you have a hard stop because you are a busy. Thank you so much for speaking with me. This was great. I think it's really been interesting to get your perspective. But again, I feel like this is the big question is how do we work within regulation and create the right regulation? So thank you so much for coming on, and I hope I have you back at some point. So appreciate it. Thanks.
Well, thank you. This has been fun. It's been nice to finally meet in person or via Zoom.
The new world. Thanks so much.